Hi, everybody. John Haldi here, and I am delighted to have my friend Steve Crawford with me. Steve, welcome. Welcome back, I should say.
Glad to be here again.
Steve, I caught you off guard. We normally like to plan and have a topic, but there's so much that's been going on in our space, the Linehaul space, in the last few months, and we haven't had a chance to catch up. I'd love your permission to just talk to you about some of the different things that are happening and get your opinion and maybe throw out some of my own, and you can tell me where I'm wrong and vice versa. Is that cool with you?
I like it. Let's do it.
So let's just call it a conversation about life, the universe, and everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff in the news, and I'm not going to name names and I'm not going to say who's wrong or right because it's really not relevant. But there's been a lot of pressure on FedEx from the contractor community, led by someone more in the P&D space. Have you been following that closely, or is it kind of tangential to what you do?
Depends on what you mean by closely. I have been following it.
So we live in the Linehaul world, and there are problems in the Linehaul world. From what I gather, there are even bigger problems in the P&D space. Okay.
That sounds fair.
My personal opinion is that the P&D folks have very, very legitimate complaints about some things that FedEx has done that's affected their business. That said, I think that in the P&D world, there's also a lot of contractors who are suffering operationally for those problems that FedEx has created, but they're also suffering because of a balance sheet problem because they have too much debt, and that's not FedEx's fault.
Correct.
And what I mean by that is, if you buy a business that's got $1 million in revenue and you're counting on 150,000 in profit, and FedEx creates a bunch of costs on you and you're only getting $70,000 of profit, that's definitely a problem you have to fix, right?
Right.
But if it's compounded by the fact that you had 130,000 a year in debt service that you have to pay, and you needed 150 and you had no cushion to have that drop for any reason, now it's not just FedEx's problem, because we know that this business runs in cycles and there's better times and worse times, right?
Right.
And I don't know how many of the people who are in deep trouble, and there are certainly people in deep trouble, how many of them is it a balance sheet debt issue, and how many of them is an operational issue, and how many is a combination. But I'd love to see those numbers before I start pointing the finger and deciding who's completely at fault, because I think it's a confluence of problems coming together at once.
I agree. And I've been around the industry for a long time, over 50 years, 27 years here with FedEx Ground. Formerly, obviously, it was our RPS, Roadway Package System. So I've lived through these cycles before. I'm old enough to remember going through inflation in the late 70s, early 80s. And the impact that it had. And I'm not trying to diminish the situation where we are today, but we are in a cyclical business. And I rode out 2008, and we had prosperity in 2016. I actually went and got my own authority, and things were good. Then it went bad. Then they got really, really good. And I pulled the plug in the middle of 2019. And I'm glad that I did, because a lot of people that tried to stay till the end of the year ended up going out of business, filing bankruptcy and things like that. So we have some pretty fierce cycles in our business, and we have to plan for those cycles. And this may seem like it's a deviation, but I think it's really important. There's things that disrupt the business that catch you by surprise, or they may come at you slowly. And there's other things that are, really aggressive. For example, we recently saw the hurricane down in Southwest Florida. Kentucky had tornadoes last December. There's been earthquakes, blizzards, and things like that. All those things kind of just, boom, it happens. And you got to call it the National Guard, get FEMA, reinstall the electric grid, and everything happens really quick. A lot of disruption, like the advent of e-commerce, came at us slowly. COVID impacted us, there's no doubt. E-commerce was going up this way, and COVID caused it to jump way up. Well, now reality, by the means of inflation, is setting in. And it's not that e-commerce is collapsing, but the consumers have just so much money to spend. And I'm a glasses half full kind of guy. We used to have 12 million packages a day, I think was one of the numbers that FedEx was picking up, and now it's 10 million. Well, for me, it's like, how can I do it? Where's my niche in the 10 million packages? I can't worry about what's not there. And as a reference point too, this is way different, but oh gosh, 4 or 5 years ago, I heard a quote, entertainer Charlie Daniels, who's passed on now though, but he, in an interview, he said, we don't play to the empty seats. We don't worry about the audience member that's not there. We just put on a good show for the audience that is there. And I think that's my approach right now, that I'm maybe softening it up too much, but we know what we have. We have to right size our operations. And maybe that right sizing the operation means right sizing our balance sheet. And there's many ways to do that, but that's where you got to take a look at that.
I agree. The problem I have with the way you're presenting that, though, Steve, because I talk to a lot of folks, is it's one thing to look generally at the contractor community, but everybody's business is different, right?
Right.
And I think that exists even in the P&D space, because anecdotally, when I talk to some P&D operators, some of them talk about how their stop counts and their package counts are horrific in the territory they have. And other operators talk about how they absolutely love their territory and they're killing it because they have fantastic stop and package counts. So even in the P&D world, where there seems to be a lot of pain, there are some folks who are happily doing great there. And they're like, yeah, it's come in a little bit. I got driver costs and truck costs and fuel costs going up, but it's still working out great for me. And other people are like, oh my God, it's apocalyptic. And I'm not saying it's not apocalyptic for them, but everybody's different. Now, back to the line haul world, and this is where I wanted to talk to you about this. Routes are not all created equally, right?
That's correct.
A solo run that goes out and back and gets 500 miles a day, 5 days a week, consistently, 2,500 miles, that's nirvana, right? You can make money on that, no matter who you are. An unassigned run that's supposed to go 5 days a week and get you 2,500 miles might have been great 8 months ago, but it could suck today because it's unassigned. And a case in point, I know someone who had an unassigned run, a solo unassigned run that 8-9 months ago was doing 3,200 miles a week.
Right.
It's getting one turn a week at best right now, and he's getting 500 miles, and his truck and his driver are sitting on their hands, costing him a fortune. I mean, that's night and day, right? At 3,200 miles a week, as dumb as I am, I could probably make money operating that line haul run.
Right.
I don't care who you are, what big name you have, you can't make money at 400 miles a week with a truck and a driver doing nothing.
So the $1 million question is, what do you do? Because either you try to stick it out and that impacts your balance sheet because you're losing money, or not that you exit the entire market, but how do you modify? How do you pivot to do something else? And probably the biggest obstacle there is FedEx controls the range of pivot. I can't just say that, hey, I'm going to show up in Denver or Minneapolis or Dallas and put a truck on. That's I have to go through their channels, and that's very restrictive.
When things are good, our software has screens that help you understand truck and driver utilization.
Right.
And historically, in the last 3 years, when I've tried to talk about that, owners have looked at me like, why are you wasting my time? Like, I can't keep up with the amount of freight I have to move, and my drivers are worried about hours of service violations because they're so busy. Well, now it's time to focus on truck and driver utilization, because when you're paying truck payments or lease payments, right, and you're paying insurance and you're hired a driver and you're paying workers' comp and you got guaranteed minimums to keep them from quitting and all these other things, and the guy's only busy 1 or 2 days a week, or he's only getting 200 miles a day, it's going to kill you. I don't care how good of an operator you are. You can't cover your fixed costs, much less the variable costs to pay that person.
Right.
And I hope someone from FedEx is listening, because in my opinion, this is the crux of the problem. They've got contracted power, which is you and your peers. They're the cheapest solution, right?
Right.
You've got contingent power to step in as needed, right? And they're
Right.
more expensive. And then you've got purchase power, right? The most expensive.
Right.
I don't understand it when I see that purchase power is prepaid, right? If you're going to prepay anybody, you prepay the cheapest guy.
True, but now we're talking about, there's some deep management philosophical problems at FedEx. You and I know this, but the people that need to listen to it and do something about it at FedEx that's outside their vision, I think. Because you just basically stated a truth, but they're ignoring it.
Well, let's hope someday maybe someone from FedEx watches this, and I don't want to get you in trouble because you're an operator. I have nothing to do with the FedEx ground. My paycheck isn't dependent on them, so I'll take some risks here. I find it very strange that FedEx is leaning so heavily on unassigned runs. And I think that the problem has to do with misaligned incentives at the terminal level. Okay. They're telling terminal managers, you need to get the freight moved the cheapest way possible and go ahead and create runs if you have to. And the terminal managers seem to me right now to be giving out unassigned runs, like the dentist gives out, Band-Aids or lollipops, or whoever. The doctor gives out lollipops to kids when they get their shots. Like, hey, yeah, everybody take an unassigned run because it costs them nothing. And if they can convince people to actually run the freight at $1.40 a mile, $1.50 a mile, they look great for using the lowest cost freight. But a terminal manager doesn't understand the impact that has on the overall health of the ground network, right?
Right.
Terminal manager doesn't understand that when Steve Crawford takes 2 unassigned runs and occasionally runs them to move the freight cheaply, they don't understand that to make that work, it's impacting Steve Crawford's overall profitability, because that driver who only ran for 2 days out of the week still needs to be paid a minimum of $1,400 or $1,500 to keep him in the seat. And the truck lease cost, that's not lower because you didn't put miles on the truck.
No.
They still want their money. So
Right.
You're borrowing that from somewhere. And that means you're not making as much as you need to keep your fleet up to date, to hire the better drivers, to have the better safety record, and to do all the other compliance things. So someone is patting themselves on the back at the terminal going, yay, I got Steve Crawford to haul this thing at $1.50 instead of using contingent power. But they don't understand that has a long-term impact on the overall health of your business and the rest of the network. Unassigned runs are like poison if they're overused and abused.
Well, I agree. And there's 2 ways of looking at it. I have some unassigned runs that still today are producing good revenue.
Okay.
I also have some unassigned runs today. In one market, we've got 2 unassigned runs that should be 14 runs a week. Yeah, you're not always going to have 7-day work, but we're lucky to get 6 out of 14. So here you got one market doing great. Here's another market doing poorly. And maybe they've got too many trucks. Maybe the pattern of freight has changed. Maybe, I know contractors that have willingly given up team runs. Team runs are really where the money is if you're staffed properly. But because of a lot of the operational headaches and the staffing headaches, they've given up team runs and taking long solos, what we call roll, rest, roll, where you roll through 10 hours, lay over, turn around and come back. And they've cut their gross tremendously, but they have not. It's not a proportional amount of cut of the profit, though, because they've eliminated some steps, they've eliminated some headaches and everything like that. I can understand FedEx's need in the unassigned world, excuse me, because we used to be a lot more rigid in the distribution networks. And yes, they would call it pre-Amazon, because I remember there was a company that their distribution was, they had a warehouse in Reno, Nevada, St. Louis, and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So they were able to cover all of the United States from those 3 points within, say, 2 days, maybe 3 at some real remote locations. And now the Amazon effect, where there's practically a warehouse on every street corner, well, now everybody wants their freight in a day. And, so where you ran from Reno to, everything was, say, 500 miles or even 1,000-mile team runs or something like that. It has changed to, and it changes quickly, to where everything is a 250-mile run, 200-mile runs. A lot, I'm going to say for me, it's at least 50% of my runs, we're doing double turns. It's only a 90-mile run or a 100-mile run, and we're doing doubles. And where years ago it was out and back. And so that change is not that it's defending FedEx, but I understand if you have an established run from point A to point B, but now you got all these other peripheral adopted points that have been entered in, you can't have all these trucks going from A to B when you need to go all these other places. The pendulum swings the other way, though, that the unassigned route is like, well, I don't know that I'm going to work. Well, that's true. Unassigned means you don't have an assignment. So you're picking up the extra work. Well, as long as there's enough extra work every day, it's okay. But the description that you gave, there's not enough extra work every day. That's the $1 million question. How do we address that? How do we fix that?
At some point, FedEx needs to look at this and go, there's too much variability from terminal to terminal, because I think that there's some terminal managers who get it and they don't abuse the unassigned runs, and they figure there's capacity in my terminal with contractors. Let's spread it out and have them pick up this extra work, and they're all going to be happier because their 2,400 mile a week just turned into 27 or 28 on 3 different trucks, right? And they got the work done. But when some terminal managers are literally unassigned run crazy, and now because of mandates about trailers can't be less than 80% full before they go and other things that come from on high, now they're left with all these folks who have created capacity. They've got a truck, they've got a driver sitting there, and they're doing nothing or almost nothing. It's why some contractors are hemorrhaging money right now and thinking this is a terrible place to be in. And if you're a new person thinking about getting into this space, I cannot emphasize this enough. All of the big contractors who are doing well, even the medium-sized contractors and small contractors who are doing this well, they're all good at saying no. Okay, the difference between being a successful contractor in a tough market and a not successful contractor from my vantage point is the better contractors know enough and are experienced enough or talk to enough people to go, oh my God, an unassigned run in that market? No, thank you. I'll pass. I'll happily take one over here, or I'll happily take the assigned run over here or over there. And it's the ability to say no to certain things as opposed to being in this growth mindset. Whatever they offer you, you got to take. Saying no is the single biggest thing you can do to determine your success in this space. Please pay attention to that.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, Steve, you've been in this space. I've seen what your routes are. I've seen what kind of mileage you get. You probably take it for granted. There are folks out there who would cut off their left arm for your kind of truck utilization.
Well, and some of that is the advantage of having been here for a while, because you build this up slowly. And we saw such dramatic growth because of COVID, where, basically what happened during the time of COVID, they reached where they were supposed to be, they being e-commerce, it could be Amazon, it could be FedEx, whoever, where they predicted to be at the end of 2024, we were already at in 2020, beginning of 21. It's really hard. I mean, growth sounds good. And I actually fell into that trap, if you want to call it that. You're growing 20, 30, 40%. That's really impressive. If you're only growing 10% a year over year over year, your banker will love you. But when you're used to growing at 30 or 40%, 10% is kind of boring. But it's kind of successful.
And there's no doubt the last 2.5 years with COVID and everything else and the explosion in freight volume has been a really strange time. And a lot of people who got into this space thought that was the norm, right? I can take an unassigned solo run getting 3,200 miles a week. Hello? Right? That's not normal. Right? The whole notion of unassigned is they don't have enough freight to make it an assigned regular run, right? And if you can get on a solo 3,200 miles a week, like someone's not paying attention at the terminal, or you better realize this is temporary. This could go away next week. And where was freight volume at the end of 2019? 6 million, 7 million?
It may have been higher than that. I don't have the numbers that far back, or I didn't pay attention.
But from the beginning of the pandemic to the end of 2022, it's up like 80%, right?
Yeah, they were predicting 30%. Well, it was like 20 to 25% growth. I talked to another contractor that basically, if everything would stay on track, FedEx was in position to double its business in, say, like 3 years, between 3 and 4 years.
Right. Well, lo and
huge.
behold, it didn't stay on track. It
Right.
wasn't a new normal, and we've pulled back about 15%.
Right.
So all of this at-risk capacity, all of this unassigned stuff that people are sitting on, now they're feeling the pain. And my heart goes out to them. But at the same time, you got to realize FedEx put the risk on you for this, right?
Right.
The good news, if there is good news, is you can get rid of some trucks in this market if you didn't commit to a lease, and the truck prices have gone nothing but up. So you're probably going to make money on trucks, and you can stop the bleeding.
They're coming back down, though. I know from experience.
But I had a recent conversation with someone who owns a very large trucking company with a contractor unit, and it was really night and day. And those of you in the FedEx world won't believe me when I heard this, because I said, do you want me to introduce you to other contractors who can bring more capacity? And he said, we don't want to get out over our skis in terms of freight. It's paramount for us that every additional piece of equipment we bring into the network is as profitable as all the other existing pieces.
Right.
Have you heard that come out of FedEx's mouth?
No. And it's not that I'm defending them, but if you're talking, if it's just general regular truckload freight and they're hauling for multiple customers, if we are subcontractors, like I could lease on to any trucking company in America. When FedEx is my customer, I'm committing to them. I tell people, yeah, we're in the trucking business, but we're really in the package distribution business. But I have not heard that type of comment from FedEx, is that we're really committed to your success. Yes, they imply that they want us to succeed, and there's no value to FedEx in having us fail. But the URR versus assigned and patterns of freight and all things like that, the contract model, just like you were saying about P&D, that contractor model needs to be revised to what's reality today, not what it was when the company was formed 20, 30 years ago, whatever it was. Linehaul is pretty much the same way. As freight patterns shift, then, like we were saying, assigned runs are more valuable than unassigned. But the business, I sold part of my business about a year and a half ago in the St. Louis area, and the primary hub is Champaign. And I want to say they have, maybe it's 15 runs a day going to Champaign. Well, if you're Champaign number 1 through 12, well, everybody's assigned 1 through 15. If Champaign volume drops down to only 12, numbers 1 through 12 work every day. And even though you have an assigned run at 13, 14, and 15, if the freight's not there and they cancel you, you've still got the mileage problem that the URR guy has. And so how do you match that up? And the network is so dynamic. How you fix it in Albuquerque is not the same way as you fix it in, say, Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Agreed. And I've heard of people with assigned runs not being dispatched, and you feel the same way about it. Like, oh my God, like that's a huge problem, because your truck cost and driver costs are still there.
Right.
This is where I think FedEx has to pay very close attention to this issue, because it's one thing to put risk on safety and compliance and other thing on the drivers that they can control, but on the contractors can't control FedEx's overall volume. They have no visibility to it. The first thing they find out is when they're not dispatched, right?
Right.
FedEx has to do what they're good at, which is logistics and figuring this out. And they have to figure out, because everybody's talking about 40 cents more a mile, okay? That's a Band-Aid that sugarcoats the fact that there's problems that need to be fixed. And I know for a fact that there are contractors who are doing just fine, not killing it, but doing just fine in this market with the existing rate structure, because they've got their truck utilization and driver utilization solved, right? Simple example. I know of a company, and I'm fudging numbers a little here, but they're doing 24,000 miles a week with 10 solos.
Okay.
I know of another, and they're doing fine. Another
Right.
company's doing 24,000 miles a week with solos, but it's 18 or 19 runs and 22 drivers. And
Right.
guess what? They're not doing fine,
Right.
right? FedEx needs to figure out how to get some minimum threshold for all of these trucks, all this capacity they have, and get them consistently rolling so that you can keep a driver in the seat happy because they're doing 2,400 miles. And if it's team, they're doing at least that for each driver, right? And keep the freight moving. FedEx is the only one who can control those levers. You can't do it in an individual contractor side. And there's no incentive to try to band together and demand anything from FedEx. It's not going to get you what you need. FedEx has to figure out at the network level, they've got the software, they've got the people to do the logistics to say, how do we make sure we're using our capacity in a consistent way so that these contractors at current reimbursement levels can make money and survive and thrive, right?
Right.
And that's not the conversation that I'm hearing going on. Everybody's screaming 40 cents a mile. FedEx needs to listen carefully to what you and I are saying. They've got to fix this utilization problem because otherwise, I don't think 40 cents a mile fixes it for some folks. They need $1 a mile in the market that they're in.
When I think one of the factors that enters in is that when FedEx contractually has given me a run, that's an assigned run, and somebody else has, well, actually, there's two components to this. Let's just say that I'm in a major hub where I have both night and day runs, and there's, say, 6 runs at night and 4 during the day. In order to satisfy FedEx, I have to have a VIN number for every one of those slots. So I have to have 10 tractors. The reality is I could have 7 because you could have the ones that run at night, run during day and get better utilization. And that's just a matter of, instead of managing VIN numbers, just say, here, Mr. Contractor, we are giving you these X number of runs. Here's your performance standard. Here's your expectation. Go do the best job that you can. And let's not have any failures. And if I can run a 10 truck operation by reducing it down to 3 because it matches up, great, yahoo. Now, the reality is if you're in Rapid City, South Dakota, or Sioux City, Iowa, or, some other small community, wherever, they don't have day and night work because it's strictly night work. So they don't get the advantage there that the bigger markets would get. But if FedEx was able to improve, it might be, and I wouldn't be thrilled about this at all, but maybe I have to give up something in order to get something. And if it makes sense, we at least have to think about it. But as we were talking about size a year ago, when business was going booming, I was on track to have 40 trucks. We've been selling some off, do this, that, and the other thing. We're down to 23, and I'm expecting to be at 29 by the end of the year because I am matching the size of my fleet so that I can have maximum utilization with what I have. And and if new things come along, yes, I'm going to consider them. The difficulty that I have and every other contractor has, if we sell our excess equipment right now, oops, an opportunity comes along, you can't get a truck for a year. Unless you can go buy used trucks or pay ridiculous prices and whatever. But if you give up your capacity by selling your excess overhead, you have limited your opportunities for growth in the future.
Agreed. But I want to go back to what you were talking about, the assigned run with 15 loads going to Champaign and they only get through 1 through 12 these days because they have a volume drop off, right?
Right.
Incentives aren't aligned properly. The terminal manager making the decision, we're only going with 12 loads. There's no pain for him. All the pain's on the contractor, right?
Right.
Let's go ahead and assume, and I think this is fair, terminal managers are smart people who know how to manage their business. You got the whole bell curve. I'm sure there's a few that you'd love to see the back of, and there's some spectacular ones who will probably get promoted out to do something else soon. But they don't have incentive structure and the flexibility to do something smart. And I would think that there's got to be a way internally to say, my God, we've got 3 contractors who didn't get their assigned runs done this way, 13, 14, 15, right? Maybe the contractor's getting paid, or maybe they're getting paid at half rate, or somehow put the pain on the terminal manager to say, I'm going to get dinged on this because the contractor's getting something, right? And give them an incentive to go, hang on, I'm going to go find them a bunch of spot work or some unassigned work or some additional work elsewhere that'll gap fill them so that they get their miles this week and I don't take the ding. Because you guys dance like crazy with points and declines and all this other stuff when you can't show up. But there's no pain on a terminal manager when they yank something out from under you that was contracted, right?
True. And with what you said, though, the one dynamic that enters in is that those Champagne runs I was describing were nighttime. So you have a driver that's supposed to work night. Nope, now you don't have anything for him. Hey, you can come in and do some trailer spots tomorrow. Well, now you're shifting his sleep cycle to daytime, and you picked up some extra work. Well, hey, we have this run for you tonight. Oh, my driver worked during the day. Ding, you got a decline. You did him a favor on this side, and you get a decline on that side. So many contractors are like, I just want to do what I've been assigned to, and I'm not interested in helping out in other areas. And every one of us is going to make our own decisions on what we want to do or not do about that.
Right. And it goes back to smarter contractors know when to say no, right?
Right.
They get bit once and like not doing spot work to make it up. Thank you, no, because then I'm going to take a decline. But there's got to be some incentive alignment to get this right, because I get it. If FedEx doesn't have the freight, they don't want to send trucks back and forth, right? From A to B. Maybe the solution is they pay you 60% of what you would have been paid and they share the pain or something like that. But there's got to be some sort of adjustment for the fact that when things are going down, you all don't have the ability to shed truck weight and driver weight like that and then pick it back up next week. I mean, depending who you ask, hiring a driver costs anywhere from $2,500 to $10,000, depending on the market. You can't let a driver go because you don't have work this week and then expect the terminal manager to say, well, get the guy back. He's gone, right? You got to start over. FedEx has to figure out how to be more in tune to this market. And when they can't be, they can't expect the contractors at their contracted rate to take all the risks associated with fluctuating freight volumes. I mean, FedEx knows the pain. At peak time, this huge bolus, they're paying purchase power 2 and 3 times what they pay you to provide extra capacity. Why do they think you're capable of running so lean and everybody else has got to be paid through the nose?
Well, there's a couple things with that. You're hitting the nail right on the head. And there's several nails that have to be hit, though. Yes, they pay more for purchase transportation, but they also, when peak is over, it's goodbye and they're gone. And so I know we have one customer in one of my markets that FedEx wanted to increase the rate, and the customer said, no, we can get it hauled at the same rate somewhere else. And they're doing that right now. But they're probably going to come back and use FedEx during peak at full price because it was a discounted customer. And that customer's figured out that paying full price for 5 weeks is still cheaper when they take the overall 12-month reduction. And so FedEx is going to look at it that way. They really get into what is the real out-of-pocket cost. And one of the things, as you said, the burden, if you will, is being put on a contractor. That's one of the things about FedEx. If you look at them as at a balance sheet, all of my trucks, I think what there's supposed to be 6,000 contractors and roughly 1,500 to 1,800 Linehaul contractors are within that 6,000. Every truck that we own is not on FedEx's balance sheet. And so their profit and margin can do this. But if you take what is your margins versus equity and all that kind of thing, FedEx still really looks pretty good as a business model. But the pain and suffering for those of us on the inside is that how do we sustain this? Because every one of us that's doing this wants to come back tomorrow and next month and next year and next decade and everything like that, and have that be part of our it's our business. In my case, it's my livelihood. It's my retirement. And so I need to have this succeed. And when FedEx has a board meeting, they don't sit down and say, gee, how can we help the contractor succeed? That's the difference between FedEx and the company that you were referring to. They're interested in the success and they apply skills and resources and whatnot to the success of the owner operator. FedEx, it's not that they don't care, it's just that they have a business model that they expect us to fit that model.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you there because I've been asking a lot of questions about FedEx and trying to understand their worldview. And I could be dead wrong, right? I mean, I'm an ignoramus when it comes to FedEx, but when you listen to the investor relations calls going on right now with FedEx, okay?
Mhm.
FedEx is getting pushed in a lot of different directions, right? Fred Smith has stepped down, Raj has stepped in. Raj's first mandate from Wall Street, from investors, from activist investors, D.E. Shaw, right, was you got to stop with all the capital expenses and start returning some money to shareholders. So he's got this cloud over him right now, and I haven't looked since the last hit to the stock price, but FedEx and UPS kind of do the same amount of freight volume, and UPS has like a 3x multiple on market cap compared to FedEx.
Mhm.
Either UPS has to have the air come out of their tire somehow, or FedEx better get that stock price up, or you're going to have a Walmart or a KKR or an Apollo banging on the door doing a tender offer. And management's scared to death of that because the first thing they're going to do is come in and start lopping off heads from the top down and change everything. And as a contractor, may not be the worst thing over time for an Apollo or a KKR to take over and change the worldview. But if Walmart takes over, God help you. I don't think long term that's good for you because they are as cost conscious as anybody and they will shave 7 pennies out of a nickel and expect you to give the extra 2 up, right?
Right.
But that's one set of pressure. We've all read about the air pilot strike and everything else happening to them. But when they go there, historically, FedEx has bragged about the strength of the ground network, as they should, right?
Right.
It's an engine that keeps on producing, and it's been riding the wave of the growth in e-commerce, right?
Right.
I think at the top levels, they've kind of taken for granted that the place is just fine. And I think that the top brass has finally woken up to the fact that in their crown jewel, the ground network, the engine that's producing all this cash, things aren't fine. And I think they're finally paying attention. But I think that it's going to take a while to fix because it's not fine because they haven't set incentive structures in their own management ranks all the way down to the terminal and in the rules that have been promulgated with contractors and the way you all operate. All the incentives are out of whack. They've got to look at that carefully and retool it. And they can't make wholesale changes overnight without breaking a lot of other crap. So it's going to take a while to get this thing right. But I am optimistic that at least, I've heard they've hired Deloitte. They're asking good questions of some people. Sadly, because of the PR associated with this other nonsense that was started by somebody else, they can't be vocal and open about wanting to learn because that's going to be seen as a sign of weakness because of that other crap that's happening. So they got to do this quietly. It is happening, right? So that's a positive. I'm not down on FedEx. I mean, my company is dependent on the ground network being successful. So I'm trying to make this successful. I hope FedEx folks are listening. There's a lot of things. Let me take a sidebar. You mentioned peak, or I did. You care to make a prediction about peak? And don't get yourself in trouble because I have one that's not flattering to FedEx.
I've gone through this before and I've used these terms and different managers have heard me say it. For me, this year peak will be a non-event. The consumers just aren't buying. I've been through peaks that have been just boom years, and I rented extra trucks, made a whole bunch of extra money. I've had years where FedEx had a strong peak and it did nothing for me. And this year, I'm, my approach is that stabilizing my business. I want to say stabilize, stay the course with what I have and take whatever low hanging fruit that I can get. But I am not making arrangements to go out and add additional overhead to hopefully transport packages that probably won't be there. And that's not me insulting FedEx. The consumer today, if you had $100 in January 2020, it's only worth $88 today, and the consumer can only buy just so much.
No, it's not an insult to FedEx, but it's the reality not only of the freight volumes that we're anticipating, but last peak, FedEx way overbought purchase power.
Right.
And FedEx, if you're listening, please understand, nothing is more disheartening to a contractor than to go the distance to get the capacity in terms of equipment and drivers, have it all ready, and then sit there paying for all that and watching everything leave the yard because the purchase power was prepaid and there's not enough freight to keep the contractors busy.
Well, a friend of mine that's a contractor in Columbus, Ohio, told me that the way he looked at it is he loses money during peak and he makes his profit outside of peak. And he's just accepted that as a way of doing business. It's very counterintuitive, but that's what he does.
And last year it was absolutely the season. Now, 2 years before that, plenty of contractors added capacity. They were very well rewarded for it. It was worth it. It was worth the crunch. Drivers had fat paychecks. You know, it's kind of like you see those episodes of Deadliest Catch where the guys kill themselves for 6 weeks and they come back and the deckhands each got $35,000. Woohoo, we'll take the pain, right?
Yeah.
This last season was like the boats went out, they set the pots, they baited everything, they paid for fuel, and then they found out, oh, crab season's canceled. It's right. Like, what? So I hope FedEx, please try to get it right, because first of all, you blew some credibility last season. Most of the seasoned contractors I know are not going to go add capacity going into peak. They're going to keep what they're doing. And if they can do a little better with some extra work here and there, so be it, but they're not going to knock themselves out. They're not spending the money to recruit. There's no equipment to add right now without paying a king's ransom. So, but please don't overbuy purchase and then not send people on assigned runs that they should be doing during peak season. I mean, that'll just be horrific PR internally if guys who didn't add capacity are running at 60% because you've got to send the purchase power out instead. That would be awful. At the minimum, pay your guys and take the hit and tell the purchase power guys to sit there reading, you know, Cat Daily or whatever it is they read when they're not driving.
We have a lot of influences coming at your point. It's certainly not that you're wrong, but you've got the pressure from Wall Street and the activist investors and everything like that that are saying improve your profits. And I did listen to one of the investor calls, whatever, with Raj, and two things that they said they were going to do. One is start grounding some airplanes, because it doesn't make sense to flying airplanes that aren't full.
Right.
That's pretty easy to figure that out. And the other is to improve the Linehaul network, where you got freight and you got ground that consists of massive Linehaul network. But the fact that they still need to have so-called purchase transportation, in the past, it was, and we still are a service-minded company. We are only as good as our ability to deliver the package to the end consumer. If that fails, this company fails. That's all there is to it. And again, not that I'm saying I'm supporting it, I'm defending it, but FedEx has done that in the past. We're going to allocate X number of dollars to the purchase transportation. And if some of the assigned guys or whatever sit, they, like you said, it's a PR hit, but FedEx was more, it appears to me, and I can only go by what I either see or what I speculate towards, but they were willing to take the PR hit in order to maintain the service level, because the report card for them really is a satisfaction of the Walmarts and the Targets and the Kohl's and whoever all our shippers are, Chewy's and whatnot, continuing to come back. And so they lose a little margin here, but they maintain customer relationship. Well, when you have the contractor relationship, you know, we used to have a department called Contractor Relations. Now it's Business Development Services. When you have the contractors, basically failing because of nothing that they've done on their own. Some people just give up and quit. Some people don't grow as actively as they should. But if I'm FedEx, that's really a fine line to have to walk. We want to keep the contractors happy, but we need to increase capacity for this, for the network. And one thing that we're not seeing this year is, in previous years, FedEx has put a cap on certain shippers. You can only give X number of loads per day, X number of trailers per day, whatever. I have not heard of that coming in yet. Now, it might. I'm not an expert on that. I have no inside information or anything like that. But everything that you're saying is accurate, but it's really tough to implement, especially when you have this new pressure from Wall Street on performance.
Agreed. And yes, there's a PR hit, and I get it. If a terminal manager's got a load that's got to go somewhere, and there's a purchase power truck sitting there, and there's a contractor sitting there, and the purchase power is already paid, even though they're being paid $800 to take the load, and you could pay the contractor $300, If you send the contractor, you're also paying the $800. So now it's $1,100 and one guy goes, right? I get why they send the purchase power, but top guys, think about that. Think about how expensive that is, and think about the optics. And think too about the optics that contractor relations switch to BDS, right? Business development. Business development basically implies recruiting of contractors. What happened to contractor retention? How expensive is it to lose a contractor? Are you just planning to replace contractors? Like, you guys have to think holistically about the ground network and what makes things healthy for all of these individual folks, right? And believe me, I'm the last person to think that the contractors should band together and demand anything. I think that's the wrong way to do things, because everybody's business is different. But FedEx, you have to think holistically about what makes an ecosystem where all these different folks can thrive and survive and do well. And you're not doing it. You got to listen and you got to think more. And it's not a single magic pill. You've got zero incentive in your organization for your people to think creatively, entrepreneurially, and take risks. Okay, I get it. In the line haul space alone, you got 1,500 owners who are creative entrepreneurs who work their ass off. At least figure out a way to listen to them and get ideas and try things that work, and incent your people to take some chances. You're not missing creative entrepreneurs in your ecosystem. You're just not paying attention to the ones you have.
Yeah, I would agree. I think especially, because my world is line haul, so I know of people that are in P&D, but I don't know that many of them. Have become well acquainted with line haul contractors over the years. And some of the guys are really, really sharp operators and have good suggestions. And the suggestions make sense. They're viable and they are doable. But I think one of the roadblocks that's not addressed, and it's almost like, gee, we hate to say anything, it's getting through FedEx legal, because they look, in that case, everything is through the prism of, are we going to get sued?
And it's a good prism to look at, but sometimes you have to go, yeah, we might be, but the business imperative says, let's take the risk and move forward. It's more important to move forward and do the right thing from a business wise than let the lawyers make every rule, because that brings you to a standstill.
Right.
And look, my wife's a lawyer. Sorry, sweetie, but sometimes you can be overbearing in that regard, and I have to ignore you. She knows that, right?
Yeah.
It's the legal team's job to point out the risks, but that doesn't mean they get to veto everything.
Right.
And I think Raj and those folks, they know that. And when they get involved, they're the ones with the power to say, we're going to ignore legal and do this and take some risk. I think when it comes down from legal and it gets to someone at a terminal manager level or a regional manager level, they don't have the clout to say, forget legal. They can't do that.
Right. Right.
So I have been blathering way too long, Steve, but I also didn't want you to say anything that could get yourself into trouble. So I wanted to say some of the bad stuff. If somebody's watching this and they were thinking about getting into the FedEx line haul space, what's your general advice to them right now about the space? Avoid it like the plague, get into it, something in between? What's your thought?
Well, I would definitely not say avoid it like the plague.
Okay.
I think, and again, I'm speaking, my experience is just my experience. There's other contractors out there that can give theirs. Don't try to do too much too quick. And I've fallen into that trap. Hey, we could open up into all these locations and do all this. Well, yeah, then you start finding out what the roadblocks are. Grow, and you might need to talk to somebody like me, or use your software, or talk to some of the other folks that are connected to the Line Haul Summit or whatever. There's a lot of wisdom with my fellow contractors in the line haul space. For example, and this is my number that I use, you really cannot afford to have a manager unless you have 5 tractors. Now, for some people, maybe it's 4, maybe it's whatever. There's a number where you can afford to have a manager. So if you want to jump in and, hey, this is passive money, I'm just going to they're going to send me checks in the mail. This is not a passive investment. You can be absentee. I live in St. Louis, and part of my operation, actually half of my operation is over in Ohio and Kentucky. So I don't have to live there. but I'm actively involved in talking to people daily and know what's going on in the operation. So I would say get in wisely, get in slowly. If you take somebody that goes into franchise, they McDonald's or something like that, they usually don't have a new guy come in and start with 9 stores. You start with a small amount and you build organically. Maybe you buy out another franchisee or something like that. You build it up over time. And then you have to both not just know it, but you have to understand your metrics. What should be your expected fuel ratio? What should be your expected labor ratio? Talk to some of the other people, talk to some of the advisors that are in the industry, and we can help you, or we can give you information that you can take a look at and come up with your own game plan. I'm not going to say that some of the guys that are failing grew too fast. They grew with the speed of the market, but now they're at that point of, well, wait, I'm over. I have way too much capacity, and how do you right size that? How do you avoid that? And I guess I'm almost 70 years old, and I have to rein myself in sometimes. Just wait a minute. This is kind of a bubble. This is growing really fast. Let's not get too big for our britches. That's something. For the generation I grew up in, we heard that when we were kids all the time. So I think FedEx space to get into in Linehaul is really a good market. It has served me well. It has served my family well. This is what I do. But you've got to understand the markets that if you're an investor looking to get in, and you know that it's not passive. What you can do in Woodbridge, New Jersey is not the same as Rialto, not the same as Denver, not the same as, being in, say, maybe Dothan, Alabama, or Sioux City, Iowa, or whatever. So you got to understand your market, understand your ratios, and really keep the balance sheet in order. I will admit that because I'm growth minded and, aggressive in business, and I like to see things grow and everything. I paid a lot of attention over 27 years, 25 years. I was focused on the P&L statement. And I'm starting to realize with very much importance that you got to have equal or more attention to your balance sheet, because you could always fall in that trap. I can always buy one more truck. I can always get one more driver. I can always borrow money and do this, that, and the other thing. And we're doing okay. I'm not, in any hazard or danger or anything like that. But you got to watch that balance sheet just as much as you watch the P&L statement.
I would add that you also have to understand depreciation and cash flow reports. And,
yes.
And you and I have started talking
and the tax significance of it.
Yep. So I'm going to sum that down for anybody who's thinking about getting in this space. The last 3 years have been incredible growth, boom time for FedEx contractors, both P&D and Linehaul for a while there. People who were in it beforehand saw multiples for the businesses, whether they were trading, go through the moon. So it was a seller's market in 21, 22. It's coming in. So if you're thinking about getting into the space, number one, know that the market's coming to you. Okay. If you're thinking about acquiring. Number
right.
two, know that FedEx is very aggressive about giving out runs, but you got to be careful because a lot of what they're giving out is this unassigned stuff that we were talking about that can be toxic depending. And it's very much a numbers business. You have fixed costs that you cannot do much about very quickly and variable revenue. And so in good times, it can be great. And in bad times, it's awful. If you've ever watched the Deadliest Catch stuff and you see the episodes where they go out and spend all that money on bait and crew and gas and everything, and there ain't no crab, it can feel like that sometimes, right?
Right.
And you need to know that these things happen and be prepared financially. Back to what Steve said, your balance sheet can't be so debt heavy that you can't afford a downtime like that. That's the game ending play, right? So if you're going to get into the space, you're thinking about it, it is a good space. It is a good business model. I think FedEx is going to fix these things. It'll take a little time. Educate yourself. Folks like Steve and I are happy to talk ad nauseum about things. There's other folks that are happy to share their knowledge. Come to the meetings, get on Facebook group, do those things, learn about it, but don't listen to a broker who's promising you 30% returns. If it sounds too good to be true, it is. Okay. There is real money to be made, but it's not fantasy, island Bitcoin kind of crazy returns. That's not true. It takes hard work. Lenders will lend against the space. Interest costs have gone up. but you can get into this space without too much equity and make a nice return on your time and money. But it ain't free money. It ain't Bitcoin kind of crazy. It's going to triple in value. And know that as the multiple comes in, prices are coming in, you may see some depreciation in something you buy in the near term. Long term, I think it'll go back to a norm. But that's the state of the market, and you should be completely aware of that before you make any commitments to your own time, treasure, and talent.
Well, and one of the things that you said about the equity, the cost of entry is not all that great compared to some other things, and I would agree with that. At the same time, don't be undercapitalized. I've seen a lot of guys fail because, if something can go wrong, it will. Not, okay, sounds kind of defeatist, but I know one gentleman that I helped get into the space in a relatively small station. I started out with 3 or 4 trucks, something like that. And, the target date to start was going to be October 15th, and he got his trucks and he hired his drivers. And, well, they got pushed back to November 1st. I think they finally opened up November 11th or 15th or something. This is about 2-3 years ago. And he didn't spend money foolishly, but when he hired his drivers, and back then you could make a guy satisfied with $1,000 a week, he committed $1,000 a week to his drivers. Hey, this isn't going to start right away, but I'm going to go ahead and pay you. This is going to work. Don't go looking for another job while we're putting this all together. And he started out with 5 drivers. Here, well over 2 years later, 4 of those 5 are still with him. But he was willing to invest the capital in his people along with the equipment to get out the starting gate. If you start on a shoestring, which I did in 1995, but that was when they let you have 1 truck and you drive it yourself. They don't do that anymore. But to reasonably start today, it is a comfortable entry point, but definitely don't be undercapitalized.
Great point. Yeah. And make sure you understand the difference between equipment financing and acquisition financing, and make sure that if you're doing acquisition financing, you understand how big of a bite that's going to take out of your profits and your cash flow, and for how many years, and are you comfortable with that? Right.
Right. Okay. One thing, many people have heard me say this, what I do at FedEx is not pretty. It's not glamorous. It's not sexy, but they need me 52 weeks a year.
Yep. So feel free. We're going to put Steve's contact info and my contact info on the bottom. Steve, I can't thank you enough for taking this much time to let me ramble on and you not to tell me I've lost my mind. You're very gracious that way.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here, and maybe people think I've lost my mind. Who knows?
And we were having a great series of conversations before we got pulled into the vortex that was all the work for our show in Dallas. But for those who don't know, end of June at linehaulsummit.com, the dates are up there, and registration is going to open very soon for the next Linehaul Summit. And we have some more interesting things, learning opportunities coming that we're working hard on, and we hope to tell you about later this quarter. And Steve and I, we will continue our Linehaul conversations about whatever topics. If you all have ideas on what you would like to hear us talk about, please shoot us emails. We're going to put our contact info, and we'll try to get to those topics and bring in other experts depending. All right.
And one thing I'd like to add to that for the people listening, the summit is excuse me, a little allergy thing here. The summit is not an expense. It's an investment. I talked to several people that are looking into getting into the space, and I said, come to the summit because you will learn and be able to go forward, or you might spend a little bit of money and say, this is not what I want to do. Either one of those outcomes is okay, but this is where it's pure learning. You're with other people that have the same goals, the same mindset, the same companionship that you have. And I was just really thrilled with the fact that there was contractors that have been there for 20 some years were coming around guys that have only been here a matter of weeks or months, say, hey, can I help you with this? Or, hey, can I share that with you? And, as one of the rarities in an industry, I think, where you actually have that type of connection and companionship. And as John and I talked about it afterwards, I think people are looking for community and they're looking for content, and you get both of them at the summit. I strongly recommend, if you can be there, bring your team too.
you'll learn more in 15 minutes than you will in 3 days of web surfing at the summit. It's like
Right.
drinking from a fire hose. And even
Right.
if you're not having the conversation, to watch like Steve Crawford and Dave Tomash talk about the nuances and impacts of different recruiting strategies is pure gold. You can't not learn watching folks like that interact. It's great stuff.
Well, I
So
appreciate the compliment, but there's a lot of guys there that are really good. Together we all make each other better.
absolutely. Absolutely. So with that, we're going to sign off. Looking forward to hearing from everyone. And we're hoping to be back out on the air with you very soon with some more conversations. Thank you, Steve.
Goodbye, everybody. Thanks.